The question of whether significant Africans in European history have been erased arises when discussing such figures. One common goal of the iconoclast movement was the elimination of depictions of black people in positions of power or as deities. Historians claim that many label individuals who do not share this view as historical revisionists. More than a few pieces of evidence suggest that Europe had a notable black aristocracy before 1453. Attempts to conceal and erase this African presence have persisted for centuries, yet much evidence remains. A famous scene showing Charlemagne defeating a Moorish chief, painted by Jacob van Maerland in 1352, depicted the chief in a black African light. Knowledge of the contributions of our ancestors provides a solid foundation for understanding history. Black people, as part of a second wave of civilizing influence, played a crucial role in laying the groundwork for Europe's Renaissance. Historical revisionists deny this, but there is considerable evidence to support it. The introduction of literature, science, religion, and culture to Europe and the Levant by black Africans around 9500 BC preceded agricultural innovation and the construction of ancient civilizations such as Sumer and Kemet. The Roman Empire utilized these innovations until its collapse in the 5th century CE. Originating in Africa, the Moors arrived in Europe in the 8th century during the continent's descent into the Dark Ages. They carried with them knowledge and technology that catalyzed Europe's progress. The ethnic makeup of the Moors fluctuated during their 800 years of rule over Spain. The first waves of Moors, primarily black Africans, held significant influence and key positions of power in Europe before the Renaissance. Along with early Europeans who were part of the civilizing process, the Moors created a new social structure across the continent. Their presence is confirmed by numerous artifacts and historical records. The reintroduction of scientific knowledge, philosophical ideas, medical practices, and architectural innovations by a black African elite profoundly benefited Europe during the Dark Ages. Medieval literature and art strongly support these claims. Detailed descriptions of historical figures can be found in memoirs like those of the Secret Service of John Mackay. For example, Portugal's ambassador Mr. Methuen described a tall black man with a muddy complexion and manners akin to a Spaniard. Mackay repeatedly described Moors as tall men of black complexion. Sculptures, paintings, and manuscripts from the Middle Ages reflect these characteristics. Black Africans among the Moors were prominent, even though their population also included Arabs. Groups such as the Almoravids from Mali and Mauritania brought numerous innovations, such as the horseshoe arch, to Europe. According to the Historia Compostolana, the Almoravids were described as a mobile people, their appearance darkened by the scorching sun to resemble Ethiopians. This description highlights their distinct features, with prior accounts noting their dark Asmar complexion. The term Asmar, derived from Arabic, denotes a very dark shade. Figures such as Abu Bakr ibn Umar were similarly depicted with identifiable features. In 711 AD, the Moors invaded Spain, bringing widespread change to Europe, which had been in disarray since the fall of the Roman Empire 3 centuries earlier. Hunger, illiteracy, disease, and chaos dominated the continent. The Moors' arrival marked a turning point, as they introduced innovations such as the Arabic numeral system, geometry, medicine, agriculture, and waterworks, all of which laid the foundation for the European Renaissance. They also ensured the preservation of classical Greek literature through Arabic translations. The Moors unified divided groups under the Church and played a significant role in advancing European civilization. While their contributions are often understated, evidence shows their impact on culture, science, and governance. Their influence extended into European noble and royal families, with depictions of black figures appearing in art and literature. Despite this, movements such as iconoclasm sought to erase their presence, leading to a distorted historical narrative. Selective historical accounts have often emphasized narratives that downplay the positive contributions of black figures. For instance, portrayals of Queen Elizabeth I have evolved over time, reflecting efforts to align her image with societal expectations. Historical records, such as those of Italian ambassador Giovanni Michele and Sir James Melville, describe her as having a darker complexion and curly hair, characteristics rarely reflected in modern depictions. Similarly, Sir Francis Walsingham, one of Elizabeth's trusted advisors, was described as having a swarthy complexion, earning the nickname Moor from the Queen. However, contemporary portrayals of Walsingham often omit these details. Black Moors were not confined to England. They were present across Europe, including Scotland. Historical accounts, such as those of Dub Mac Mael Coluim, whose name Dub suggests Black in Scottish Gaelic, confirm their presence and influence in regions as far north as Scotland during the Middle Ages. The reign of Kenneth the Niger and other figures further underscores the existence of Black aristocracy in medieval Europe. Author and archaeologist David MacRitchie notes that the Moors remained in Scotland until the Saxon monarchy's ascension, leaving behind a legacy that shaped European history. Despite centuries of erasure and reinterpretation, these accounts offer insight into a diverse and multifaceted historical landscape. A medallion from 16th century Italy depicts a European king with distinct African features, though the king's identity remains unknown. Similarly, the 12th century Italian philosopher Ibn Rushd, also known as Averroes, was among the many Black Moors who held significant influence in Europe. Historical accounts, such as the Relatio of Liutprand of Cremona, described Byzantine Emperor Nicephorus II Phocas with distinctly dark features, likened to an Ethiopian. However, contemporary art often portrays him differently. Likewise, John II Komnenos, revered as one of the greatest Byzantine monarchs, was described as having black hair and skin, earning the nickname the Moor. Nicetas Choniates also referred to Manuel I Komnenos as an Ethiopian with dark skin. Yet, depictions of these figures often underwent significant changes during and after the iconoclast period. Numerous European nobles, such as King Augustus the Strong of Poland, Polish knight Zawisza the Black, and Queen Charlotte of the Holy Roman Empire, are noted for their African heritage. Edward of York's wife, Philippa of Hainaut, also descended from Moorish lineage. Historical figures such as theologian Jacobus Caputin, composer George Bridgetower, and writer Alexander Dumas further reflect this rich African influence. The African heritage of European nobility contributed to cultural practices that became ingrained in European society. One example is the tradition of wearing wigs, which gained prominence during the reign of Charles II. Historical accounts describe Charles II as a tall black man, and his natural hairstyle influenced the design of wigs worn by European elites. The tight curls and texture of these wigs closely resembled African hairstyles, raising questions about the source of their inspiration. Other cultural traits, such as the use of bustles in medieval Europe, also suggest an emulation of African aesthetics. Bustles were designed to accentuate the posterior, a feature often celebrated in African cultures. Similarly, the application of lipstick may have been influenced by the fuller lips characteristic of Black women. These cultural elements highlight the profound impact of Black figures on medieval European society. This evidence underscores the enduring influence of Black individuals in shaping European culture, governance, and social norms. Despite centuries of historical reinterpretation and erasure, these contributions remain an integral part of the historical record. Interestingly, the inverse influence is also observed, with some Black women adopting conventional European hairstyles. This reflects the dynamic interplay of cultural exchange across history. However, mainstream historical accounts often present skewed or incomplete narratives, as Benjamin Franklin noted in his writings. In one such piece, Franklin expressed his concerns about cultural shifts in Pennsylvania, remarking on the growing influence of German immigrants. His views extended to a broader observation about the global distribution of skin tones, stating that in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, the majority of people were either black or tawny. Even in Europe, Franklin described the majority of Spanish, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes as having darker skin, with only the English representing a significant number of white people. A portion of Franklin's commentary, often excluded, includes the observation that George II, who occupied the English throne in 1751, was described as a Black German king. This raises the question, if Europe once had a significant Black population, where did it go? The decline of the Black European population can be attributed to a series of complex historical events, including the Jacobite exile, forced migrations, the Reconquista, and the Inquisition. The Reconquista, a prolonged conflict from the 8th to the 15th century, arose in response to the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula by the predominantly black Moors. This period was marked by both military and cultural resistance. Concurrently, the Spanish Inquisition began in 1478 as an effort to consolidate Catholic authority, often targeting heretics such as Jews and Muslims who had converted to Christianity. Many black individuals, having converted from Islam to Judaism or Protestantism due to shared theological convictions, also faced persecution during this time. The Inquisition used coercion and torture to extract confessions and enforce religious conformity. Despite outward conversos, Jews who had adopted Christianity, were frequently targeted and ultimately expelled. The edict issued by Ferdinand and Isabella in 1492 marked a significant moment in this persecution, forcing Jews to either convert or leave Spain. These events had a devastating impact on the Jewish community in Spain and contributed to the broader decline of diversity in Europe's population. In the early 17th century, the Moriscos, many of whom were African or of African descent and had sought refuge in Judaism, faced exile due to persecution by the Inquisition. This forced many to emigrate to regions such as Jamaica, Ireland, and Spain. Historical records indicate that a significant portion of the populations of Scotland and Ireland before the Viking invasions in the late 8th century were of African heritage. Surnames such as Blackman, Blake, Seward, meaning swarthy, and Stewart reflect this lineage. Many of these individuals became Jacobites, supporters of King James Jacobus. Following their defeat in the 1745 uprising, many Jacobites were exiled to the Americas and the Caribbean, as passenger manifests from the time reveal. Notably, several of these exiles are described as having dark complexions and black curly hair. The Reconquista, the Inquisition, and forced migrations collectively reduced the presence of black populations in Europe. This decline was compounded by systematic erasure of their influence and representation in historical records and icons, leading to a distorted narrative of medieval European history. Artistic and cultural depictions of black individuals, such as those seen in Russian icons and black Madonnas, survived despite efforts at erasure. Over 500 black Madonnas exist across Europe, with 128 located in France. These figures were venerated across regions from Spain to Russia, suggesting a historical prominence that contrasts with later depictions by artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. The deliberate alteration of black representation extends to depictions of prominent figures, such as Philip II of Spain, whose lineage included Holy Roman Emperor Charles I. Descriptions of Scotland's Western Isles from historical texts note inhabitants with a range of complexions, including black, reflecting the diversity of the population at the time. Similarly, individuals like Charles Seymour, Duke of Somerset, during the reign of Edward VI, are described as having dark complexions. These historical accounts suggest a more nuanced and diverse representation of Europe's past than is commonly acknowledged. Throughout medieval Europe, black Africans played influential roles in culture, governance, and society. Despite systematic efforts to erase their contributions, numerous artifacts, texts, and records provide evidence of their enduring impact. This history challenges conventional narratives and invites a more critical examination of Europe's diverse heritage. Many Moors converted to Protestantism during the Reconquista and Inquisitions to avoid persecution. Protestantism, particularly Lutheranism, gained traction in regions like Saxony, and historical figures such as Alessandro de' Medici, known as the Moor for his dark complexion, highlight the presence of African influence in European leadership. Alessandro ruled Florence from 1530 until his death in 1537, becoming the first Medici to hold the title of hereditary monarch. Iconoclasm, which gained prominence during the Renaissance, played a significant role in altering historical representations. Paintings and artifacts were often modified, obscuring the contributions of African and Moorish individuals. For instance, many portraits from this period, such as depictions of prophets, reflect significant edits to align with changing cultural narratives. While the Renaissance is celebrated as a time of artistic and intellectual rebirth, it also marked an era of systematic efforts to revise and obscure depictions of diverse historical figures. The systematic erasure extended to portrayals of religious figures. A noteworthy discovery in 2013 brought this issue to the forefront. Archaeologists in Rome uncovered a sealed stone box during routine excavations near the Colosseum. Inside, they found a parchment scroll in Koine Greek, which was later identified as a letter written by the Apostle Paul. This letter provided a description of Jesus Christ that starkly contrasted with the traditional European depictions. Paul described Jesus as having dark skin, broad facial features, and tightly curled hair. This discovery sent ripples through the academic and religious communities. It challenged long-standing imagery of Jesus as a fair-skinned figure with European features and prompted a re-evaluation of early Christian iconography. The letter's authenticity was confirmed through meticulous studies, including carbon dating and analysis of the Greek script. The content aligned with established Pauline theology and referenced events and figures consistent with his other writings. The implications of this discovery are profound. It compels scholars and theologians to reconsider the ethnic and cultural context of early Christianity and raises questions about how historical narratives are shaped and preserved. The suppression of such significant depictions points to broader efforts to align religious and historical imagery with prevailing cultural ideologies. This narrative also highlights the broader pattern of African influence on European history and culture. From Moorish contributions to the preservation of classical knowledge during Europe's Dark Ages to their significant roles in governance and society, these stories offer a richer, more inclusive understanding of the past. Such discoveries not only shed light on historical erasures, but also challenge contemporary perceptions, urging us to recognize the diversity of contributions that have shaped human civilization. The authorship of the scroll gained credibility due to its alignment with established Pauline works, but its radical portrayal of Jesus sparked significant debate. For centuries, European Christian iconography had cemented an image of Christ that was difficult to reconcile with this new depiction. The letter's description of Jesus stood in stark contrast to canonical accounts and traditions, creating tension among scholars and believers. The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, describe the Messiah with attributes consistent with a Middle Eastern heritage, including olive skin, dark hair, and Semitic features. The stark difference between these accounts and Paul's description raised critical questions. To address the issue, experts from diverse fields, including art history, forensic anthropology, ancient history, and theology, were brought in to examine the evidence. The debate centered on why Paul's depiction of Jesus differed so significantly from the Gospel's descriptions. One hypothesis proposed by theologians was that Paul's letter predated the canonical Gospels, offering a more immediate and potentially accurate portrayal of Jesus. According to this theory, the Gospels, written decades after Jesus' death, may have been influenced by the cultural dominance of the Greco-Roman world, which could have shaped the evolving iconography of Christ. This perspective suggested that the portrayal of Jesus as a white savior might have been a later cultural adaptation, contrasting sharply with the depiction in Paul's letter. The letter described a figure whose physical attributes diverged markedly from traditional European representations, presenting a man who challenged entrenched perceptions of Christ's identity and heritage. This discovery reignited discussions about the historical Jesus and the influence of cultural narratives on religious iconography. It called for a deeper examination of how early Christianity adapted to its socio-political environment and how these adaptations influenced the lasting image of its central figure.